Welcome back to another episode of Cody Builds. We got a giant mess in the shop, but tonight we're working on cab corners and we're trying to get these things patched up. If you've been watching, you go way back, you remember, we got something a little bit different going on with these cab corners. When I cut the original ones out, what we found out was there was a patch there. So what I had to do was I had to cut apart the original patch from the original sheet metal and salvage as much of that metal as I could to patch before we get to our patch. So we're gonna have kind of two weld lines around where the cab corners go. And if you look at the table here, I've already cleaned up the back side of the original sheet metal here. I've hit it with a rust reformer paint for now. As you saw, I got the other side cleaned up here, getting ready to weld in. And then I went ahead and I painted up our cab corners. We're gonna treat this the same way we treated the bed here, and which we are painting the patch before we go ahead, because we were going to leave the exposed weld lines. At least that's how I'm going to start it for now. Before I get into trying to put the original sheet metal back in to the cab here, what I want to do is I want to get in, clean up some of this rust and hit that with the rust reformer as well. Once I've gotten that taken care of, hopefully these will be dried up and we can start fitting the original sheet metal back onto the cab. By the time we get that tacked in, I'm hoping that those cab corners are dried up and we can fit those. So the goal for this video would be to patch both the cab corners here and get the cab kind of all back into one piece. As you guys saw last week, we've got the cab sitting on the frame. It's not permanently mounted yet. I'm still waiting on cab mounts. This is the last of like the rust repair on the cab. So we do have some rust up here in the top of the roof, but it's nothing really serious. It's more just surface rust at the moment. So for now, we're gonna sand that down and leave it. Everything else is what it is. I'm not counting the doors. The doors have rust repair that need to be done, but we're not gonna do that right away. We're gonna hold off on that for now. All right, so you can kind of see here, now that I got this welded up, that there's a pretty good gap between where this lines up and where the actual cab corner lines up. This all comes down to the fact that they had this overlap. So this is all the excess from being overlapped. I'm gonna slice right down this edge here, take off this excess, and we'll put a new flange in there. We will reflange that, but most of this is going to be cut off anyways because of how the new cab corner is going to overlap this. So for now, I'm going to cut that off so we can get the new cab corner fit in. All right, I think I got this fit fairly well here. I did close the door once. What I'm gonna do next here is just run a marker right along the top of that panel and that's where we're gonna make our second cut, okay? It's gonna be a little bit ugly up here, but it kind of is what it is at this point. So I'm gonna get that piece trimmed out, the old panel behind pulled back, and get this one tacked in, and we'll shut the door and make sure all our body lines and everything are lined up. Now remember, the door is not aligned in the frame currently, so we want to take that relative to where the other body lines line up on the door as well. So even if they're not perfectly lined up with the door, that's okay at this point, as long as they kind of match where the other body lines on the door are matching up. So let's get this marked out, get this cut up and tacked into place, and see how we're doing here. All right, so I've got one small tack in here, and what I'm trying to do here is get this lined up with the door. So one thing I want to point out, like I said, is this door is not actually fully aligned yet, right? Like, we just got a couple, just knock that clean off. We just got a couple bolts in, and we don't really have it aligned. So if we're looking at this line here, you can see this line is just below the cab line. Same thing here, this is just below here. So really this door needs to be brought probably up a hair. So I'm gonna come down to here, and I think if you look right now, it looks like actually the door line is slightly above the body line here. That tells me, with this being higher here and this being lower here, that we're too long in this section. So I actually need to bring this up a touch, take a little bit more out of this panel, and get this aligned to where this line down on the door is just slightly above this line here. That's how we're gonna try and line this up. So I've got to bring this whole thing up just a little bit. And that's why we only did a small tack here. We wanna make sure we're getting this lined up in the best way possible before we go and buzz this whole thing in. So I'm gonna cut this off, bring this up just a touch, we'll get this trimmed out, and we'll get it retacked in place. All right, obviously we have a little more patching to do in there, but you get the general idea here. This is looking a lot better than the rusty, crusty old cab corner that was there. We made really good progress here. I have a little bit of trimming to do at the bottom just to clean that up, just a hair, but I'm liking the way this is looking. It's looking really good. Come around and look at the back side here. So yeah, it's looking good. I'm liking it. Now it's just time to get this all welded up into place. We've got to weld this seam up, and I'll have to drill a couple holes here, punch a couple holes in, and just tack weld this in. Same thing on the inner seam there. We'll do the same thing there. Get all that cleaned up, welded up, and then we're gonna move along to the other side. We're gonna do literally the exact same thing. So I realized on the other side of the truck that I jumped the gun tacking the new panel in. What I should have done is I should have punched a few holes along the sill edge here and along the inner rocker on the inside for some plug welds. And I didn't do that. It's not that big a deal. I'll still be able to drill some holes out, clean them up, wedge a file up in the backside to kind of clean the backside of the holes up. But it had made life a lot easier had I just done it on the panel before installing it. So we're gonna take our time, do that on this side. I'm just gonna punch a few holes every couple inches this is the inside of the door sill here. And then along the back side where this panel is gonna join up on the back side here, on the inner rocker, we'll punch a few holes so we can plug weld it from the underneath of the truck back towards the rocker here. So I'm just gonna use my Chief Air Tools punch here and punch a few holes. All right, so I'll line up about where I want this thing. I think I like that right there as far as fit goes. So I'm gonna throw a tack. We've got an overlapping panel here, but that's okay. We're just gonna tack this right here. Okay, that's gonna hold that panel. I'm gonna put another one back here. Okay, so now that's just gonna hold the panel in place for me briefly. And I can come up here and make sure everything else is gonna line up around the backside the way I like. The most important thing for me is the outside body line here. Around the backside, the bed's gonna have a lot of that covered up. I don't really care so much about that personally. All right, I don't hate this, it's not bad. So what I'm gonna do here is, now that I've got this tacked and it's overlapped, I'm gonna start back here at the back. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna ride right along top of my patch panel here with the zip disc and just cut a little slice out of here, bring this corner flush and tack it. We're gonna zip it, cut it, bring it flush, tack it, do the same thing again. Zip it, bring it flush, tack it, zip it, bring it flush, tack it. We're gonna do that around this corner. I'm only gonna do it 2 or 3 times at the start here so I can see what it's gonna look like. And then if I like it, we're gonna continue on the rest of the way, get this thing fit up and tacked into place. All right, I got a spot in here. Grab my little precision screwdriver, push those flush. Gonna put a knee on the panel here just to keep things where I want it. Okay, I'm gonna tack there. So I brought the corner here flush. Now I'm gonna continue this cut through this tack that I previously made. And we'll go a couple inches up the road here and make another tack once we get the panel flush. Well, I'm gonna have to throw another tack closer up to the front just to temporarily hold that. And I'm gonna have to cut through this first tack that I put in. There we go. Like that a little better. There we go. Pop this door open real quick. Clean this corner up. Now there should be a slice of metal. Got it knocked off, okay. I'm just trying to get that piece of shrapnel out of the panel so it doesn't rattle around in there. Okay, there we go. So this is that piece out of the corner here that we just trimmed out of there. I'm just making sure we got that out of the panel itself, so it's not in there making a bunch of noise, rattling around. Down the road, we can't figure out what the heck's making all the noise. Got that reattached. Now it's gonna look goofy here because I don't have this flange welded it back in yet and patched in. And our original patch panel here that we're using is really junky. It was pretty thin. I'm not super thrilled with how either side turned out with this initial patch panel, but I'm just working with what we've got. So, and honestly, you're only gonna see this section of the cab here with the bed covering up everything else. So it's not that big a deal to me. It actually is gonna look okay. It's not gonna look fantastic, it's just gonna look okay. But now that we've moved that panel up just, what, maybe 1/8 of an inch there, a little more than that, maybe 3/16, we can take a look at our body lines again. We can see we're pretty well lined up there. Again, maybe, it's hard to tell. This side looks like it's lower than the door, this side looks like it's higher, so we gotta be pretty close to centered there. Come down the door here, and again, this line's sharper than this one, but really right down the radius of that, we're pretty well lined up down the center of the radius of that body line there, even though this one's softer than this edge is. So that's the deal with these patch panels. You know, they're stamped slightly differently. This door probably has, you know, 1 inch of Bondo in it. So we can't really deem too much off of that other than trying to just get the center of those body lines lined up, which I think we're pretty darn close to that right now. So I'm gonna put a few more tacks in this, get this thing kind of tacked all the way around, and we're gonna probably call it there for this episode. So I just want to give you guys a little time lapse there of what it now takes to clean up the garage. Sharing this garage with the owner, I pretty much got to set up and break down every night. It takes about an hour of my night, honestly, to set everything up and then break it all down at the end of the night. Someday we'll have a larger shop, but that day is not today, so we're making do with what we got, and we're making progress on the truck. Let's take a quick look at the cab corners here. Don't pay attention to the bed. Again, at the time of this filming, we still don't have the right cab mounts. So the bed and everything else is not really lined up. This thing's sitting lower than it should be. But really what we're looking at here are the body lines with the door. Now the door also is not lined up, so everything's kind of relative, but it's pretty darn close. It may need to come up maybe a 1/16 of an inch or so. But you can see I'm really happy with all these lines. They line up fairly nicely. Again, we're not fully welded up yet, and the inside of this door sill is not welded, so the whole panel's got to come this way, probably about 1/8 of an inch or so. So that's where we're going to get some of that door gap back down at the bottom. I'm really happy with it. Obviously, I've still got some patching to do up here and some welding to get taken care of in there. That'll all get taken care of. And all you're going to see are these two little weld lines here. So I kind of like that. It's fitting with the theme of the truck. with the exposed weld lines. I'm not opposed to it, honestly. I wasn't liking it, but now the more I see it, I think it's gonna work. I think it's gonna work out nicely. The rest of this truck's so rough. There's a 1/4 inch of Bondo in the top of this cab corner. Like, to make this thing right would take so much more work. We'd probably have another year of just body work on this truck, and it would never be straight because the thing's been beat to death, and that's kind of the whole point of this truck. It's a work truck. So yeah, I'm really happy with the outcome so far. I'm probably gonna finish welding these cab corners up on my own time. I just wanted to show you guys the fitment, and this one was a little unique because the original cab corners, like I said earlier in the video, were patched over with a cheap panel. They caved in the original metal, sunk all that in, and then paved over it with a bunch of Bondo. So it's all wonky. Trying to compare things left to right, take measurements, it's not working out at all. I'm not exaggerating, there's a 1/4 inch of Bondo on each side of the truck. If I'm trying to make square measurements and stuff off the cab and get the cab corners all lined up perfectly, it's not a reality for this truck. It's been used and abused. The most important thing to me now is just making sure the side body lines, the thing your eye's gonna be drawn to when you're looking down the side of the truck, are all lined up. So that's what we focus on in today's episode. Coming up, we've got to get the cab mounts figured out, and I'm hoping to have those parts this week. So that's next up on the agenda here. And then immediately following that, as far as this build goes, we're going to be digging into the 360 block that's up on the stand here. Cheap budget rebuild. The first thing I need to do is tear this thing apart, inspect it, measure out the crank journals and the bore of the cylinders, just to make sure this thing's not been rebuilt once and the crank's undercut and it's bored out, so that I know what parts I need to order. We're going to order a cheap rebuild kit. We're going to do a dingle ball hone on this thing. We're not going nuts with it. All I'm trying to do is take this thing back with a new set of rings, put a little cross hatching in the cylinders, paint it up, clean it up, throw it all back together. Anything that's broken we'll replace. We'll do some of the oiling mods that we did on the other block. But we're really going to try and get that thing put together as quickly as we can here, because before too long we're going to have the TKX 5-speed and the full kit that goes along with that, including the cross member, the clutch, and everything that goes along with it. So as soon as we have all those parts together, the engines together, we can mate the engine trans, we can stab it in the chassis, we get the cross member set up, we get all that stuff lined out. That'll feel like a very big accomplishment for the truck. That's all coming in the next 2 months. I think that's the agenda I'm hoping for the next 2 months. Within the next 2 months, we'll have the driveline in the truck, and we can start focusing on some more finishing details. So getting the thing wired, plumbed, brakes done, all that kind of stuff. So that July 4th deadline is looking a little nearer than I originally thought it was. And it's going to be really hard to hit that, but you know what? I'm going to push, and we're going to get as much done as we can every week, because if you don't work on your projects, they will not work on themselves. Get out in the garage, get building. I'll see you on the next episode of Cody Builds.